than you did going somewhere, okay? So there's a lot more veins. But the other thing, and might not pick up, is that there's a lot of superficial veins that are going to be involved. Relatively major veins, but superficial. So in the arm, the leg, and I'll point those out when we get to them. Another thing is, remember that that's how things really are. You know, everything's all together, so you can't separate out the two. So here's the abdominal aorta and the inferior vena cava. Okay, so they're right up close, next to each other. So keep that in mind. I'm going to go back to that a little bit. Make a comment about that later. You know, would it be possible, you think, to have that situation? Did you see what I did? I switched the abdominal aorta and put it over on the right and the vena cava on the left. You know, that's possible. There are times. And actually, there's a possibility to switch organs. You know, I've got a picture of one of the body worlds things where the liver is over here. The spleen is over here. Okay? It's called an inversus something. But this switching you're actually going to see. You know, I have cadaver material that you're going to be looking at that has the vessels to switch. Okay, so what we're going to do is just look at all the major parts of the body that we took blood to and see how we're going to get the blood back. And as we do this, you'll see that I'm leaving out a lot of things, okay, that you won't be learning. So let's do the head first. The external carotid. As I mentioned, you have what, 6 or 7 major vessels you're going to be learning somewhere on models and so forth. Okay? All of those are married to a vein. Okay? So like all of those have a vein right next to them with the same name. But you're not going to learn any of the veins. You're going to have one vein draining the head. That's all you need to know. External jugular vein. Right there. So all those other veins empty into the external jugular vein, and then of course it's going into the brachiocephalic and back to the heart. Okay, so that's the head and neck. So we take care of the head and neck pretty quickly. Okay, so let's talk about the brain. Okay, you remember on the brain that we looked at, we had the internal carotid, but it had a bunch of branches that you have to learn. We had the vertebrals. Well, the vertebral are married. You know, there is a vertebral vein, and all those other arteries have veins. Same name. Okay. Now remember, always remember, they're married, but the blood's going different directions. Okay. So it's opposite direction. If you look down on the vein in the artery, you see the flows are different. Okay. You'll say, well, sure. Okay. Keep that in mind. All right. So all of those arteries have veins. You're not learning any of those. You're not going to be learning any of those. But you are going to learn the sinuses, because all of those veins empty into a sinus. Picture the pericardial sac. Just think about it. The pericardial sac that is around the heart. What if there was actually veins embedded in that pericardial sac that drained the heart? You say, well, I don't think so. I mean, you're right, it's not. You know, there's no way of doing that. But the brain is also protected. by this big piece of connective tissue. It's called the duramater. It protects it, and embedded in the duramater are veins that drain the brain. It's the brain drain, okay? So all of those smaller veins that you're not learning eventually empty into these, superior sagittal sinus, inferior, straight, so forth. They're called sinuses because they're embedded in the duramater, but they are veins, okay? And all of those veins, sinuses, empty into the internal jugular vein. So the internal jugular veins are the ones that drain the brain. Where are they located? In the neck. Is the internal jugular vein married? Is there an artery right next to it? Yes. But, sort of like in this department, you know, people are sometimes marry and they don't keep the same name. They keep the original name. You know, here they have different names. So who's the partner of the internal jugular vein? Common carotid. And you're going to see him right there in the neck, in the cadaver, common carotid, internal jugular vein. So when you hear this term, you know, go for the jugular, and you know, you cut the neck and gone to the jugular, get all this blood coming out. That blood's coming from the common carotid. Most of it's coming from the common carotid, because that's got all the pressure. The jugular doesn't have much pressure. I mean, there's blood coming out, but it's not really spurting out. Okay. Okay. So that's for the brain. All right, let's take the upper appendage. Okay. Remember, you had it's the Flavian artery, axillary artery, brachial artery, and we also have a subclavian vein, an axillary vein, and a brachial vein. You see them right there? I just might mention here, you know, I go on this thing about the different directions, you know, the married ones, but make sure, you know, if I put on the test that a drop of blood is in the axillary artery, where does it go next? What would you say?
Brachial artery.
Brachial, right? If I put down there's a drop of blood in the axillary vein, where does it go next?
Brachial.
No, the subclavian.
Oh, okay.
Subclavian. Remember, blood's going the opposite direction. And the vein is heading to the heart. So, you know, that's why I keep saying, you make sure you remember, you know, it's going opposite directions. Because on the test, you know, the problem with that, this is sometimes the way you learn these things. You say, oh, the brachiocephalic artery branches into the internal jugular and the subclavian vein. Okay? No, it doesn't. The internal jugular vein and the brachial and the axillary vein form empty into the brachiocephalic. Opposite direction. And it's just a habit to say, oh, this branches into this. But when you think about it, that's what the arteries are doing. But the veins are forming the bigger one. Keep that in mind. Anyway, there is a couple, there's 3 more veins though in the arm that are not married to any arteries. They're just all by themselves. The celiac, what is it? The cephalic, I'm sorry. The cephalic, the basilic, and the median cubital. Goes across here, that's where you take blood out of. Okay? Those have no arteries with them. They're superficial, and but they are draining, and they're important drainages. So you have to know those 3. You're not going to learn any veins in the forearm. Okay, nothing. so that takes care of the opportunity. So let's, oops, we're gonna move that yet. Okay, there is an important vein draining the thorax. It's called the azygous vein. Kind of hard to see it on this, but it's draining the thoracic region, the posterior thoracic region, and it empties into the superior vena cava. That's the only major vein draining the thoracic area. You have the pulmonary, but they're for the lungs. So, that's in that region right there. Now, let's move down to the inferior vena cava, which is down in the abdominal region. And so we had paired vessels from the adrenal glands, from the kidneys, gonads, and so forth. So all of them have partners as veins. You're not learning all of them, but you will learn a couple. For example, you will be learning the renal veins, right along with the renal arteries. Obviously the iliac veins, iliacs. But let's take another case here, gonados. You're going to see that on the checklist. Basically, on everywhere, you just tell me it's a gonado. Yeah. You don't really have to tell me if it's an artery or a vein. Just say gonados. I mean, they're always going to be right together. Okay? But something's kind of interesting here. Here's the gonados right there. And all these veins have to drain in to the inferior vena cava, right? Because that's what's taking everything back to the heart. So here you'll see the gonado empties into the inferior vena cava on the right, but over here it empties into the renal vein. Okay? So why doesn't it empty into the inferior vena cava? Well, it goes back to that thing. Remember, you've got the inferior vena cava over here, the abdominal aorta right there, side by side. So on this side, the gonad empties into the inferior vena cava. On this side, to empty into the inferior vena cava, it'd have to go across the aorta. These are small veins. They could be torn. They're pretty thin. So to protect them, why not let them go into a bigger vein on this side and then across? So that's what the gonados do. They empty into the renals, and the renals go across the abdominal aorta. No problem, because they're bigger. And you're going to see this is going to be, you can see that perfectly on the cadaver. Okay? All right, so we've left something out here though, right? Again, you don't see any internal organs. The digestive system. How do we handle that? Well, let's stick them in here and find out what vessels veins are draining back. Okay, remember those three unpaired arteries: celiac, inferior mesenteric, superior mesenteric. They have also veins of the same name. Here's the inferior mesenteric vein, superior mesenteric vein. It mixes up a little bit here and kind of gets away from that. There's a splenic vein. Of course, you're learning the arteries well. But all of those veins are draining the intestines. And they empty, all of them empty, into the hepatic portal vein, right there, which empties into the liver. So all the capillaries you have here in the intestines form veins. that you see there. And those veins all converge on one hepatic portal vein and empties into the capillary network of the liver. Okay? Now, let's talk about the hepatic portal vein. Does it have a partner? You know, I'm really stuck on this partner thing. Okay? Does it have an artery next to it? Yes. It's called the hepatic artery. Okay, it comes off this, the celiac trunk. So right next to it, you've got the hepatic portal vein and the hepatic artery. They're married. And interestingly enough, they're going the same direction. Remember how normally when you look at an artery and a vein, the blood's going the opposite direction? Not here. Here, the blood in the artery and the blood in the vein are going the same direction into the liver. So what that means is that the capillaries in the liver are getting both arterial blood and venous blood together. Get it? And then the liver does its magic. And then there are hepatic veins coming out of the liver right up here. So make sure you don't call the hepatic portal vein the hepatic vein. Okay? You can call it the portal vein, hepatic portal vein, but do not call it the hepatic vein. It will be wrong. Okay? So you have to be kind of careful there to get that hepatic portal system into place. Okay. So that takes care of the hepatic portal system, and the only thing left, lower extremity, not much here. There's a femoral vein, goes along the femoral artery. And there's a great saphenous vein, which is the superficial. It has no arteries next to it. No major arteries. It's all by itself. Okay? That's the one that in real severe